So often I run into people who want to be a light and live for God with purpose, but they honestly feel lost when it comes to how to do this. Do you desire intimate encounters with God? And are you hungry for real life answers to grow in your walk with God? Are you confident in your purpose and vision for God's kingdom in the face of current cultural affairs? My podcast is intended to cultivate intimacy, a solid foundation, and direction for this generation. Get plugged in with Nemo. We will be the ones to see it through, and everything lost will be renewed. Long ago in the garden it was to be, now a dream fulfilled in you and me. Hello. Welcome. I'm so excited to get rolling with this podcast adventure. I've been planning to do this for a while, and just now getting everything going, and I'm getting ideas and getting just excitement about what this can be. And so welcome, and I hope you enjoy this. A few years ago, God turned up the amplifier on me about a topic that I hadn't really done a whole lot of thinking about, but having zeal for God. And as I began to contemplate this and study in the Bible, the idea of zeal just started to overtake me. And of course, we know about Jesus having zeal when he went in and overthrew the money changer's table. I think it's something that is very easy to lose. And God wants us to maintain this zeal because it's in a good thing. When we are pursuing him, we have to maintain that zeal. Everything in life wants to steal that, wants to take it away from us. But we have excitements about many things. It doesn't matter what it is. You can have a lot of interest in sports, or you can have an interest in a different hobby, maybe learning to fly planes or different kinds of things. And you have a lot of excitement. When you hear people talking about it, you get into it, you get interested. But when it comes to the things of God, are we really excited and have a zeal for our pursuit of him? And I don't want to lose that. So I want to read out of Galatians 4. Verse 18 says, "It is good to be zealous in a good thing always, and not only when I am present with you. My little children, for whom I labor in birth again until Christ be formed in you." I'm going to pull that right out of context and not talk about anything else that he talks about. It's the best way to learn from the Bible, right? Well, in this case, I like to pull this one out, not because I want to abandon what he's talking about, but he makes a statement in there that is, I believe, a statement that he's making that it transcends the context. It doesn't oppose it or it needs to be understood in the context. It's a statement that he's making, and that's there because he's talking about. He says that people have tried to come in, convince these believers of things that are different from what he has taught. And he said, "Now have I become your enemy? Have I become your enemy because of what they teach you is different from what the foundation that I brought when I taught the gospel to you?" And he says, "They zealously court you, but for no good." They want to exclude you that you may be zealous for them. Paul was teaching them the gospel and had brought these people the gospel and established the faith, and other people wanted to take control of that. So that's the context, but he then makes the statement, "But it is good," and I'll just rephrase it, "but it is good, it is always good to be zealous for a good thing." He's telling them, these people want you to get really into what they're teaching and pursue that and even abandon your relationship with me because of what they're teaching, and ultimately abandon your relationship with God that Jesus had established in them. And
But he says this thing. It's always good to be zealous for good things, because he didn't want them to be fearful and step back and say, well, we got duped, and so we're going to be really cautious now. He didn't want them to do that. So he says this, it's always good, but you have to make sure that you're zealous for a good thing, not the control, not the things that somebody has tried to come in and take control over you in. And has anybody here, I have not, so this is speaking from other people telling me about it. Has anybody attended a class where they tell you a certain percentage of the grade you're going to get is for class participation? Who's been a part of those classes? Most people who have attended class in college have had this, but I'm sure there are some high school credits that are similar as well. And sometimes that's very valuable. That's because the class participation is what it's all about. One of the aspects that you're supposed to be learning is how to use this information in conjunction with what the other people are doing. And that can be a very, very beneficial thing. Now, we also have, a certain amount of your grade is going to come from the test scores. And you have a series of tests throughout your semester that you're going to get grades from. And you may really, really struggle at the first part of it, but then you get enough high grades on the latter part of those tests, and so your score bumps way up, and you get a passing grade or even a high score in the class, especially if you keep your participation going and you're getting a high score on your participation. You're being very interactive with the teacher and with the fellow students of what is going on, and so that brings your grade up. And I think that this passage here is talking about class participation. He's saying that if you believe in your heart something, but it doesn't affect you zealously, then it becomes negligible. And it also makes you prone to being, to losing the emphasis, of missing the point, or forgetting what you have been learning. And so Paul is talking to them. He doesn't want them to lose this in the process of the trial that they're going through. A test, if you will. They get points for passing this test. They get their grade if they pass this test of not being swayed, not being pulled over to a side that was called of the circumcision in earlier Galatians here. A group of people that wanted to pull them into their belief and their way of doing things, away from the firm foundation and the establishment that God had given the church. Sadly, as we know in Galatians, that the teaching that Paul has given here has turned into a lot of ideas and philosophy that don't apply to the church directly, and we have actually consistently reversed the message that Paul was actually teaching. In Galatians, we've turned it into and established the church apart from the purposes that God revealed himself throughout history in. And many people have used what Paul was teaching in Galatians to do that. So we've misapplied that, which I think if you actually read the whole book, which it's intended to be, Paul's books are letters, and they're intended to be read, I think, aloud for one thing. You hear things in it when you hear Paul's letters read, so I like to listen to them. I listen to the audio versions of them because you get something that you often don't get from merely reading it. And you also see how he thinks as a person, because when you hear it being spoken, you hear the more of the context of the connection between the beginning of it to the end of the things, and the way he ties his thoughts together. Whereas we tend to study and get zeroed in on one of the points that he makes, and we don't really see the full picture. And his books aren't that long, Even his longest ones you can listen to in a short amount of time, and it is very beneficial. And so with Galatians, you see this very clear, that the things that he states early on, very strongly and emphatically, he expounds on the idea and explains what it means in the context of our faith that sadly have been neglected. So I don't really want to go into that part of Galatians so much, but that he does not want us to go through these things and lose this zeal. The zeal is multifaceted. It gives you something to have a driving impetus in your life. Zeal, having something that is a focus to you, that is exciting, it gives you something to get up in the morning that you're excited about, and you're not facing the question of, what am I going to do? I don't really know what my faith is about. I don't know what being a Christian really means to me. When we have this zeal, it gives us that. It gives us this connection with God, that we are running full speed after the things that God is doing, instead of being stationary and uninspired. And so, but another thing that zeal gives us is it gives us a connection with God on a level that when we recognize his goodness, he says in a good thing, when we recognize the truth of it, we don't lose that in the difficulties, in the hardships, in the things that cause our life pain, cause us difficulty in making a living, whatever it is. But specifically, when we're talking about trials of our faith, when we face junctures in our pursuit of God where we lose friendship, we have people that we used to get along with, and all of a sudden we're at odds because of doctrinal dispute or different things like that. Zeal gives us the connection with God to not fall prey to walking away or losing faith. Zeal is something that we cannot live without. It's absolutely impossible to have this walk with God without the zeal. And Jesus at one point, I believe, they quoted the scripture about Jesus anyway, when he said, what was it? Is it Isaiah that it was quoted, but the zeal for the house of the Lord has eaten me up. That was when he went in and whipped the money changers and flipped the tables, and that's the verse that the disciples recognize. Hey, he's fulfilling this. He's showing us what this means to have zeal for the house of God. Zeal for the house of God did not let Jesus walk in and say, "Oh man, this is really sad." He put it up good. He said, it didn't allow Jesus to walk in there and say, "Oh man, I can't believe what they have done. My house, the house of my Father is turned into a den of thieves, and it's supposed to be a house of prayer." And he walks away. Oh well. That's not what it did, because he had zeal for the house of God. He was not going to let what should be, with anything in his power, he was not going to let that be taken away or stolen with anything within his power to accomplish. And so this zeal overcomes him, and he will not stand by. And so he makes a scene that was known forever and throughout history, that he's standing against us. This house of prayer that is supposed to be for all nations to come to seek the face of God and have a place before him was being stolen by greed, by selfishness, and people who wanted to control and take away that connection to God. And his zeal for that would not allow him to stand by. If he didn't have that zeal, would the disciples have seen that? Would they have witnessed that? Would it have been recorded for us to understand what this zeal is all about? It wouldn't have been. But also, I believe that there's much more to that story that you can't see, so we can't really comment on what directly, but we know that things like that have impact. How many people there actually had a heart for God, but were blindly participating in something that was very anti what God wanted to do, very much against the heart of God, and they were set free. They began to realize it because of the stand that he took, the zeal that he had. So when we operate in zeal, many people who have never seen it, aren't aware of what was going on there, have a heart for God. But when we have the zeal that God wants us to have, especially for the house of God, for the things of God, for the people of God, when we take that stand, when we do that and are overcome with that, it breaks those things off. The shades, the dark sunglasses come off, and all of a sudden you see the detail that you were missing. It opens our eyes and opens the people of God's eyes to the reality of the heart of God that was there. The heart behind what was going on was not to come in, purchase your sacrifice, and just go through this procedure. The heart was clear that it was supposed to be this place for all people to come, to make petition, to come close to God, to speak to God, to have God show his kindness and his mercy and his love with forgiveness. This was supposed to be what it's all about. And so all the people there and the different ones, maybe the ones coming giving sacrifices, opens their heart to what this is really about. That's what we do when we have zeal. And so class participation is where we get this grade. You don't have the opportunity to just simply study the book and have it down, because there's things that can only be accomplished through the interaction, through the moments that we share together, through the zeal that God has in our hearts consuming us and overtaking our fear and overtaking our habits, overtaking our insecurities, to become and step into the things that matter. When God has showed us something, to speak it, to share it with all we have, to step into that, because somebody else who was blindly following it, not aware, but had a heart for God, now all of a sudden is delivered and set free. And so it is always good to be zealous for these good things. We cannot achieve the purposes of God without this zeal. And so this class participation is required in order to get the grade. Without that, the score in class participation, the grade will be too low to pass. You have to have it. We need that class participation.
God does not accept a half-hearted walk. He demands that we be willing to give ourselves to something, even if it's uncomfortable. We must demand of ourselves deliberate interaction in times with each other. We should be filled with zeal and never become passive in our pursuit for God. This is so quintessential in our walk. If we let it go, we find that life becomes dry and the things of God become less and less the main focus of our heart and what we really desire, and we begin to be filled up with many other things. I was thinking the other day about how if you have a jar of water and you start with it being full of many other things, you fill that thing up and it be full. It will be full and maybe even water flowing over the top. But as you remove those things out, the water level drops back down and it might be less than half full. So right now we might feel like we're full of God, but in reality, it's only because we've filled ourselves with many other things. And so it's time to remove those things and be filled with God. And that comes through having a zeal in our pursuit, that we will not be satisfied with less than all of our hearts and all of our life being dedicated to knowing God. And that turns everyday activities into very meaningful things, because that's what it's really about. God didn't design us to be so spiritual that we can't have any understanding of normal activities. That's weird. That's not what God intended at all. He wants to be present in all of that. That is his desire, for us to invite him in and have that zeal for him, that every area of our life is filled with him. And so when we're at a baseball game, when we are at a family event, when we go out to the movies, everything is filled with that zeal, because he makes it more colorful. He makes it more exciting. He makes it more meaningful and more fun. That brings us to the end of the first episode, and I thank you for your time. I just remind you to let your lion out. We will be the ones to see it through, and everything lost will be renewed. Long ago in the garden it was to be, now a dream fulfilled in you and me. Whoa.